Turbo Esprit is a video game published by Durell Software in 1986 for the ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, and Amstrad CPC. The game was very detailed and advanced for its time, featuring car indicator lights, pedestrians, traffic lights, and a view of the car's interior controls. Turbo Esprit was the first free-roaming driving game, and has been cited as a major influence on the later Grand Theft Auto series. The object of the game is to prevent a gang of drug smugglers completing a delivery of heroin, by tracking down their cars and destroying them, or ramming them into submission. The player takes the role of a special agent driving the titular Lotus Esprit car, which had been used in a James Bond film a few years previously. The player must travel around one of 4 available cities looking for the criminals. Messages from HQ will flash up periodically giving the location of a target armored car, which may then be tracked on the map. A courier car would then attempt to rendezvous with the armored car to transfer the heroin, and the armored car would then flee the city. Other courier cars would act as decoys. Players could elect to wait until the drug transfer was complete before intercepting the armored car, or instead attempt to find the one genuine courier car in order to prevent the transfer from taking place. Once a drug dealer's car is found, it can either be followed, destroyed with the Esprit's built-in machine gun, or repeatedly rammed until it surrenders. Different cars may need to be dealt with in different ways. For example, armored cars must be rammed as shooting has no effect, whereas randomly occurring hit cars are the only other vehicles that can match the Esprit for speed, so ramming them is more difficult. Following a drug dealer's car too closely may arouse suspicion and cause them to abort their mission. Points are scored by apprehending the criminals. Additional points are awarded if they are captured alive, by disabling their car rather than destroying it, and if the heroin transfer has taken place, as there is now greater evidence of their crime. Penalties are incurred for hitting scenery or other cars, and the player's car is likely to explode if it crashes into anything while traveling fast. As in real life, speeding greatly increases risk. Turbo Esprit was generally well received by the gaming press, gaining positive reviews from most major gaming magazines. Sinclair user called it one of the best games ever released, 16, and it has since been described as pioneering, 3, and one of the Spectrum's best original games, 8. The Spectrum version was voted number 64 in the Your Sinclair Reader's Top 100 Games of All Time. 17. Retro Gamer magazine said of the game, "It was way ahead of its time, and it could be argued that what you are looking at here is the genesis of the Grand Theft Auto series, and that it sealed Durell's reputation as a purveyor of quality software." The game reached number 8 in the Gallup All Formats charts and number 1 in the ZX Spectrum chart, replacing Movie. The game features 4 free-roaming cities, Wellington, Gainsborough, Minster, and Romford, through which the player may drive as they see fit. 6. Each city features a grid plan of roads, and each is progressively more difficult. The first city contains many 3-lane roads making speeding and dodging traffic easy, whereas the later ones have more 2-lane and 1-way roads. The cities contain many computer-controlled cars, all of which obey basic traffic laws, such as keeping below a set speed limit, stopping at the working traffic lights, moving out of the way of obstacles such as roadworks, and attempting to avoid head-on collisions with the player. They will also stop at zebra crossings to allow waiting pedestrians to cross the road. Contact with or destruction of these cars results in score penalties. The player's car can also run out of fuel, and so the player must stop at petrol stations to refill. You know that time has marched on when something that everybody did without really thinking finds itself categorized and pinned down by a catchy title. Take emergent gameplay, for example. Today, that's the fancy game theory term for players mucking about and making up their own rules, regardless of what the designer intended. In the 80s, that was just how we rolled, yo. Maybe it was because so many of us were playing from hooky C60 tapes copied off a mate, or maybe it was because we just couldn't be arsed to read the 2 paragraphs of instruction on the inlay, but I'm convinced that most gamers of 20-odd years ago often had only the vaguest idea of what the goal of their favorite games were. That was certainly the case for Turbo Esprit, Durell Software's hugely ambitious free-roaming car chase for the ZX Spectrum. It's a game with which I spent many happy hours without ever really knowing or caring what I was supposed to be doing. Turbo Esprit still impresses in 2011. This is a 3D driving game set across 4 fully mapped cities, each packed with naturalistic details such as pedestrian crossings, roadworks, one-way streets, and persistent traffic that actually follows the highway code and doesn't simply vanish once it's off-screen. All this is squeezed into 48K, a smaller file than you'd need for a JPG of the game's cover art. It's simple and rudimentary by today's standards, of course, but favorable comparisons to Driver and Grand Theft Auto, Esprit's genetic descendants, are as obvious as they are deserved. Having picked a city from the 4 on offer, Wellington, Gainsborough, Minster and Romford, you're free to roar around the wireframe streets at will. Roar, of course, being a relative term. As forward-looking as the game was, sound design is not an area where it excels. From Software reveals new Elden Ring enemy with Bloodborne-esque design image. From Software reveals new Elden Ring enemy with Bloodborne-esque design. Read more on Eurogamer.net. The theme tune is a classic, a jaunty whistle-along number that has lodged in my brain for 25 years. But in-game the mighty Lotus was reduced by the Specky's farting sound chip to little more than a series of clicks and quacks, like a duck being beaten to death with a Geiger counter. None of that mattered. Nor did it matter that there wasn't really anywhere to drive to. You could go wherever you wanted, travel the wrong way down one-way streets, knock stick men off ladders and shoot your way out of dead ends by turning your machine gun on the queue of constantly spawning civilian cars blocking you in. You took penalty points for civilian slaughter, but since hardly anybody knew or cared what the points were for, that didn't matter either. It was as pure a sandbox as it's possible to imagine. Control-wise there were some clever ideas. As well as shooting your gun, the fire button doubled as a handbrake. When it was pressed in conjunction with left or right, your sleek sports car would hurl itself in the required direction. Do this at the correct moment as you thundered through a junction and you'd instantly slip onto the new road without losing momentum. Get it wrong, as you invariably would, and you'd end up lodged horizontally across the street and forced to perform a laborious 3-point turn or, worse, you'd die instantly in a squelchy red fireball. Turbo Esprit was produced with technical assistance from Lotus, though this was clearly a far cry from the exacting demands of today's relationship betwixt video games and sports car manufacturers. The famous 80s vehicular icon looks more like a bar of soap on wheels and explodes at the slightest provocation, presumably not the thrilling endorsement the company was hoping for. Even so, in an era when I considered Street Hawk to be the pinnacle of televised entertainment, Esprit's mix of navigational freedom and Russian roulette cornering was more than enough to scratch my gaming itch. They had a fairly sophisticated network going on. Your targets weren't simply puddling around at random, but following specific routines that you had to decipher and disrupt in order to succeed. Supplies would arrive at their intended destination, then delivery cars would set out to make the drop. Once they'd done their dirty deeds they were gone, and you'd failed. Even then, the game let you carry on, killing time, and pedestrians, until more drugs arrived. It's a surprisingly stiff challenge. In fact, firing Turbo Esprit up today, it's clear that playing the game properly is often borderline impossible. Narrow streets and randomly spawning vehicles on the other side of the road making overtaking a deadly gamble. As such, reaching the drug cars on the map before they vanish relies is as much a matter of luck as judgment. Fallout 4's latest graphical update is here. Fallout 4's latest graphical update is here. Read more on Eurogamer.net. It's also easy to get lodged on corners if you take them too early, forcing a complete restart. And as civilian cars can box you in and never move, you have to destroy them, racking up penalty points if not guilt. What I love most about Turbo Esprit is that I was blissfully unaware of all this intrigue and inconvenience at the time. I played it endlessly. Even though I had the original cassette in its robust Durell clamshell case, complete with instructions, I somehow neglected to understand the core premise of the game for my entire childhood. To me, Turbo Esprit was simply the drive really fast around a city game. At that, it excelled.